Hey, Tuesday.
Great to hear you. We're here for all talk about housing, right?
Yeah.
Glad to have you here. And I'm Libby Garvey. I am on the Arlington County Board, and I am pleased to be your moderator today. And let's see if I can introduce our two speakers quickly. And I do talk a little bit ahead of time. We're going to sit at the table. We've got a microphone. But we're going to try to have actually presentations which aren't going to go too long. Real-time discussions. I think they're going to be interesting questions. And you're really discussion ourselves. So I first want to introduce the first of our speaker is Senator the Honorable Favola. All right, probably needs no introduction actually. She was first elected to the state senate in 2012. Fun fact: she left the Arlington County Board and I took her place. Tag teaming for a while. She represents the 31st district, which includes right now parts of the counties of Arlington, Fairfax, and Loudoun, Maine. She chairs the Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee and is also a member of the Decision on Local Government. She's served the Arlington County Board for 14 years. And chaired that committee. Our second panelist, also probably needs no introduction, is Susan. Susan has served as Virginia Housing's Chief Executive Officer since being appointed by the Board of Directors in 1999. Prior to becoming the Virginia Housing CEO, Susan served for 3 years as a Virginia Housing Commissioner. At that time, Susan was the State Treasurer of Virginia, which directed all operations for the Department of Board. Today, Susan serves on many housing-related nonprofit boards, such as Housing Board of Virginia.
Thank you, Libby, and thank you to all of you who have chosen to spend your time with us this morning on housing. If you're in a jurisdiction that is struggling to provide housing overall, and certainly struggling to provide housing to your constituents who may be at 60% of the median income or less, you are not alone. Virginia actually has, an entire state has a shortage of housing. In fact, in 2004, we had a housing supply in Virginia that was 63,215 units. But we were building them each year, and that was the height of our build. But ever since 2004, the units we've been adding have been much less than 63,000. We've been adding about 34,000 each year. So it's half of what we were doing in 2004, yet our population has grown. In 2008, our population was grew 10.2%, but our housing stock had only grown 8.7%. So I'm not sure why our housing stock has not kept up with our population, but that clearly, and this is a statistic across the Commonwealth. So, what can we do about it? And let's tickle out a little bit who's living in our housing and what we need to make their lives more livable, more affordable. Let's start with renters. 4 in 5 of our renters, if they have incomes below 50% of the area median income, they are cost burdened. So that means they're having trouble paying for other things like food, caring for their children, any medical expenses that they have to cover. So we have to really focus on that population. And I'm probably not telling you anything, but many of those in this category would be people of color and also our seniors. So we have some state tools, and I don't want to call her my colleague, but she is a colleague. She's not in the Senate, but she's in the executive branch. And she's done a great job, so she'll give you more detail. We do have the State Housing Trust Fund, and the General Assembly put in $150 million over this biennium. Now, we were able to do that in large part because we did get those federal dollars, both from the CARES Act and then, of course, from the ARPA funding. And it was one-time money, so it's a very good use of our dollars to put it into the State Housing Fund, Trust Fund. We also have low-income housing tax credits, and we, the General Assembly, have made it clear to Virginia Housing and other agencies that may be administering those low-income tax credits, that we really want flexibility. We want our local governments and our private housing developers to be able to figure out gap funding, to be able to get those low-income tax credits, to get the kinds of projects that might give us mixed income units. And for the most part, what I've been hearing across the Commonwealth is that we have been flexible in both our approval of projects and meeting certain policy goals that are important. There are also tools that we can use to subsidize rent. There's, the Targeted Rental Assistance Program at the state level. And this is actually a program that the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services runs. And it's designed to help those with developmental disabilities pay for their rent. There's the Virginia Rental Relief Program. And then, of course, there's the federal housing choice vouchers and federal grants. There are also federal grants to low-income veterans. We do have one jurisdiction in the Commonwealth that has a locally funded grant program to help subsidize the rents. So a renter can use this local money as well as the federal housing voucher, maybe some other dollars to really become self-sustaining and not rent burdened. And that one jurisdiction is Arlington County, which has a totally locally funded voucher. So what can local government do to increase both supply and affordability? So I'm just going to throw out a lot of different ideas. Some of them have worked. Some of them have worked better than others. Maybe some need to be tweaked. Your biggest tool is zoning. Local governments really do have authority over land use, which is good. And you can use your zoning laws to help create more housing and to help create more affordable housing. You can provide bonus density in buildings where they might do a set aside of so many units that are affordable. You may not be able to require that, but you can do it as something that you would like to see done when you're going to grant bonus density. All of this is done through your section plans when you outline a vision for where you want housing, what kind of housing you want. So really make use of that tool. Arlington had a recent discussion, I guess it's still going on the missing middle, which I'm not saying all of you should adopt that, but the missing middle is a concept where lots that are zoned for single family, the traditional single family home, could then by right, be able to build multiple units, maybe 4 units, or maybe 6 units. So that's a tool. I don't know if it's going to yield a lot of units, we're not sure, but it is something that you can use in your single family zoned areas. It's really important to encourage housing near your job centers. It's a good thing if your residents and your constituents don't have to travel to work. And one of the things I want to point out, the National Housing Conference, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, actually did a study of our 20 most expensive cities in the country to live in. And New York came out as the most expensive to live in, if you're looking at housing only. And then when they factored in transportation, and you know how robust the transportation system is in New York City, New York became the 8th most affordable of the 20 very expensive cities in the country. So I thought that was an interesting fact here. And the reason I bring up this planning element in locating housing near jobs is you now have access to a lot of money under the Federal Infrastructure Act. So some of those dollars can build your infrastructure systems for transportation, and you can maybe better thread together housing and transportation in a way that makes sense for your employers. They like this as well as for your constituents. And then you're also adding the element of making living in your community more affordable. There's another concept which has been tried in some areas, and I think holds promise. Although I have to say, when I was on the county board, I didn't get a lot of support from the general population, but it's worth exploring. There's such a thing as single-room occupancy buildings. So these look a little bit like hotels, but they're buildings where you would have an individual bedroom and bathroom, but the residents would then share probably a kitchen and a common area. So the affordability really becomes easy to achieve, or easier to achieve than if you have a different model. And it's also a model that can serve as a transition for constituents who have been homeless for a period of time or are in a shelter, but they do need permanent housing. So your next step would be something that's affordable, right? But a single room occupancy model could work for them. And you could also locate your supportive services there, because you might have several individuals that would need supportive housing assistance. Supportive housing are services that, maybe mental health services, maybe job coaches, folks that check in on individuals to see how they're doing. You can also create, and this is an idea that many jurisdictions have used, just a locally funded emergency rental fund. And you can also get private dollars in those funds as well. So you can you have to talk to your county attorney, you have to establish it in a certain way. But you can fund it, obviously, with an appropriation from your local government. But you can also get businesses and philanthropic organizations to donate. And you've created a nice emergency fund, a rental emergency fund. It is far more efficient. It is more humane and better for your community if we can keep individuals in their homes and they don't want to be evicted. And in some cases, they could be evicted over something as small as they didn't make a car payment and therefore they couldn't keep up with their rental payment, and it's taken them a couple months and they're falling behind, but the landlord is issuing or about to issue an eviction notice. And that family just needs help for a while so they can get back on their feet. Your emergency rental assistance fund would be great. There's also federal money available, rapid rehousing dollars, for emergency rental assistance. And that's another source of revenue for this. Now, some jurisdictions have taken this to heart, this emergency rental fund, and they have actually developed long-standing relationships with their landlords in the communities. So landlords pick up the phone and they call the county housing office and they say, I've got this family, I don't want to evict them. I've got these renters, they just have fallen behind, but I need money. I've got a mortgage to pay. Can you work with me? Can we help? Can something be worked out? And that's a really good, I think that's a good approach. So take the time, tell your housing folks, and take the time to get to know all the landlords of these multifamily units. It's worth it. It really is worth it. Now, the General Assembly last year asked that a study be done. It was called the Statewide Housing Study. We directed this in January of 2020, is when the bill passed. It was House Bill 854. But the study is posted. And it's, again, House Bill 854, Statewide Housing Study. And I will give you some of the strategies that came out of that report. I don't know exactly how robustly these strategies will be implemented, but they're ideas. And I guess the biggest idea here is there was a suggestion that we amend the state constitution. Of course, it would have to be up for the voters. Again, it would be a referendum. The referendum question would have to pass the General Assembly, exact same format, 2 sessions in a row with an election in between. If that were the case, we could put an amendment before the voters. But what it would do is allow local governments to provide real estate alternatives or tax relief to properties that were designated for affordable housing. So it would not be a mandate. It would be a permissive authority. So I don't know if that's going to gain momentum. And I completely understand that localities really have to protect your revenue streams. I was in local government. I know real estate taxes are a very important revenue stream, and you don't really want to mess with it. But that's an idea that came out of this report. Another thing is we're looking at creative home ownership opportunities, especially in communities where there's been traditional redlining and individuals have been denied access to mortgages. And we've got a couple pilots going on across the Commonwealth, and we'll see how those turn out. But the goal was to make credit more easily available to communities that have been traditionally redlined, and these were communities of color. So I will conclude. There's some other things we can talk about. My intent was to just to give you some ideas to think about. I'm sure you're doing much more than what I just explained. You are basically managing many challenges in your localities, and I know you're very creative, and you've probably come up with ideas I haven't presented. We're happy to talk about them, happy to hear them. But at the end of the day, my message to you is we want the state government to be as helpful to you as possible, to enable you to do the creative things you think are necessary to really create more housing stock in your communities, and to also make that housing stock available to your workforce and to those who may be at the lower end of the median income. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to our moderator, Libby Garvey. Okay, well, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Dewey.
Thank you so much. It's certainly a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I know it'll soon be afternoon, but right now it's still the morning. And it is always a pleasure to be up here with my friends from Arlington, Councilwoman Garvey, as well as Senator Favola. They've been long-time advocates of affordable housing and partners with Virginia Housing. So I also want to thank VACO for having us on the agenda. I think it shows the importance of housing, and we'll talk more about, in my mind, that is like one of the core things you've got to have. You've got to have housing and shelter, and that's what we're all about, is the housing piece. I don't know if everybody is familiar with Virginia Housing. You might have heard us referred to as VHDA. We were created 50 years ago. It's our 50th anniversary by the Acts of the General Assembly in 1972. And we were created as the Virginia Housing Development Authority. And so anything you call us is fine, just call us. And that is one of the things we're known for, is wanting to partner with you. We were created as a public-private partnership, a little different. There is a state housing agency, Department of Housing and Community Development, which is a traditional state agency. We were created, though, as an independent, quasi-governmental, self-supporting authority. You'll hear us called by a lot of different names, but my favorite is a public-private partnership, because our mission is housing, and we could not accomplish that mission without the help of a great deal of partners, both governmental partners, private sector partners, and nonprofits. So that's really how we were put together. And just to give you an example, one of the things we do is we support first-time homebuyer programs. We work with 91 lending institutions all across the Commonwealth, from small community banks to large national banks, that help to give people looking for their first home access to our loan programs. We also work with a lot of developers to help build and revitalize rental housing across the Commonwealth. You heard Senator Favola talk about tax credits. We run the low-income housing tax credit program, both the federal version and the newly created state version. And we also do operate a federal program for housing choice vouchers for some of the state that doesn't have a public housing authority. But by and large, we have a model that is independent, in that we don't get any state tax dollars, which helps us both provide a great deal of flexibility and allows us to be nimble and move quickly as the circumstances around housing change dramatically. Just to give you an example, one of the things that we did in fiscal year 22 is we had 5,500 affordable rental units that we helped through our programs on the rental side. And we also, on home ownership, we originated 7,700 home loans, and most of those were for first-time home buyers. And about 40% of our borrowers are identified as people of color. So we really are making a difference trying to get people into homes. We also run free home ownership program, a home ownership education program. We think that's critically important. A lot of you, if you bought your first home, you know how overwhelming it is, so we want to make sure people understand what that responsibility entails, because the last thing we want is for them to get in a home and then to lose it. And with that in mind, we also service all of our own loans that we make. We also, the General Assembly granted us in 2005 the ability to do what's called a mixed-use, mixed-income program. And that has been a great program, working with a lot of our governmental partners on that, because one, it makes sure that you don't have concentration of lower income. It also adds the ability to have some commercial component. But the mixed income side of that means that we work with what's traditionally known as more private sector market rate developers, and in order to work with our programs, they have to make sure that 20%, 30%, depending on how it's structured, will continue to serve those at income levels less than 80%. So it's been a great model. I want to go back to one of the things, just to give you an example, that Senator was talking about. She referred to it as single room occupancy, but we were able to do, and working with the city, anybody from Virginia Beach here? We were working with the city of Virginia Beach. One of the struggles they had was to be able to get enough people that could work in their restaurants and hotels down near the ocean front. And if you've ever been in that area, which I was a few days ago, you know the traffic situation in off of 64. And so they were having a great deal of trouble and wanted to make sure they were able to have some housing so people could work near where they lived. So we worked with a developer that did a mixed-use, mixed-income property right down near the ocean front, and it has a restaurant, but it has units in there that are very similar to what you described, Senator. And basically, they have their own room to themselves, but they share some of the common spaces, some of the living areas like the kitchen and TV area. So it helps to make that affordable, and they can then ride their bicycle or walk to work. So great opportunities to do that. And in fact, if you're from the Richmond area, you know Manchester is an area right here in Richmond that we help to do revitalization for a large part of Manchester through our mixed-use, mixed-income program. One example of that is called the Hydro, and it is both in a qualified census tract as well as an opportunity zone, 226 new units. It provides critical workforce housing, and really is the result of a collaborative community-based approach. So a lot of governmental entities are partnering with us and encouraging this mixed-use, mixed-income model. The other thing that I wanted to mention, I said earlier, is about the critical importance of housing. And I think during the pandemic, we all realized how important our homes were. That's where we worked. That's where our kids had their education. A lot of times we even tapped into the medical community through being right at home. And so think about you hear quite often safer at home, but what if you didn't have a safe home to live in? How could you focus on anything else? How could you focus on education or getting a job or your health if you didn't have a good home? So with that in mind, we also helped to run one of the federal programs that provided rent relief, and several of you probably heard of the rent relief program. We partnered with the state agency, Department of Housing and Community Development. We ran a portal for the landlords that would come through us and help us get access to that rent relief for their tenants. and we are currently operating a mortgage relief program on the same principles, and that's people that have gotten behind on their mortgage, usually because of loss of income from the pandemic. So a lot of things that I think have shown us more than ever how important housing is. And the other concept of that is the idea of economic development. Now, I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but I bet all of you in this room would say economic development is important to your localities. Well, the one thing that often gets overlooked as we're looking at economic development opportunity is if you have businesses coming into your locality, where are those new workers going to actually live? And also the senator was talking about, we're woefully behind in inventory, and a lot of reasons for that. Our realtors, lenders, and particularly home builders would say they don't have enough access to be able to get land that's affordable so that they can build on it. We also know that during the recession, about 13 years ago now, what happened is, as you know, housing prices took a tumble. A lot of tradesmen got out of the business, and unfortunately, that's one of the big areas right now where we need developers and subcontractors, particularly as you go into some of the more rural areas, South Side, Southwest Virginia. You just can't find the people to actually work on building the homes. So all of that together has caused us, as the senator said, population has outpaced the development of good housing over the years. And so if you don't have enough inventory, both rental and home ownership, then of course it's just your simple supply and demand. That's what's going to cause your housing prices to go up and make it out of reach for many that we want working in our communities. You know, law enforcement, teachers, service workers, all are finding more and more they can't work in they can't live in the jurisdiction in which they work. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is partner with organizations like the Virginia Chamber that was mentioned earlier by Libby, is to try to work and to show how critical that link between housing and economic development is as we move forward. The other thing that we're finding more and more as an issue is, you know, Virginia is unique in many ways, and one of those is cities and counties are separate. So other parts of the country, you'll find a city within a county. You go to North Carolina. And here, because of that unique separation, often the localities are not always working closely together. And so to that end, we wanted to ignite the concept of housing and regionalism. So what we did with our own funding through a program that we have called REACH funds, and this is our own internally generated funding, we created a grant program for your planning district commissions. And the idea was to have those PDCs come together and focus on housing as a regional issue, because you know it is. You might have a business that comes in one jurisdiction, but the people that are going to work in that company are going to live all throughout the region. So it's incredibly important that we start looking and thinking about our region and also our regional differences. And because we like to look at and offer flexibility, we were not prescriptive in what each of those PDCs had to do. We wanted them to come out with concepts about how to best use that funding for housing. For example, right here in Richmond, you have Plan RBA as the Planning District Commission. They work closely with the Partnership for Affordable Housing, which is a nonprofit. They went out to all the jurisdictions in their region, got proposals, and they're actually in the process of using that funding to get actual units in place to help with the inventory of affordable housing. Similarly, we also have a grant program going out to public housing authorities. I think everybody here, not all of you I know, have public housing authorities, but you know the critical nature of the lack of often good housing in those public housing communities. And what we're trying to do is to help jumpstart and revitalize the public housing community, because ultimately it does impact our whole regions if we have substandard housing in those areas. So that's another example of what we're doing with some of our grant programs. We have also a lot of other smaller grants that many of your jurisdictions have tapped into. I have with me Chris Thompson here, who is Virginia Housing's Director of Strategic Housing, and he is on the road all the time working with your governments, talking about grant programs we have, capacity building, community impact, all of those tools that might help you do, for example, strategic housing plans that will help to inform you. We do this big statewide housing studies, but I think most often the regional housing plans are going to be most informative given the vast differences we have all across the Commonwealth. And the other thing I wanted to mention that we're really focusing on is innovation. Now, we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, but we want to look at new ways of tackling issues. And so, I don't know, has anybody heard of a 3D printed home? You heard about that? So we sponsored the actual 3D printed that came from Denmark. And we have a 3D printed home right here in Richmond, one of the first on the East Coast. And it was so much fun to watch that being built. We learned a lot of lessons, of course, in that. And I think one of the benefits of that is going to be ultimately to do scale, to do a neighborhood with 3D printed homes so you can continue to use that printer. But what we are really trying to advocate for is not that that's the only way to build a house, but modular homes and manufactured homes, as well as stick-built homes, all should have a place as we look at the needs for housing inventory. A lot of times, modular homes have a stigma attached to them, but when you think about it, it makes sense that you're going to build these homes in factory-controlled environments, and you're not having a lot of lumber that's stacked out on property that might be impacted by rain and other elements. So it all needs to come together because we have major needs for construction. And the more we can think out of the box and be innovative, like the 3D printed home, the better. But innovation takes a lot of different forms. One of them is financing tools. You've heard the Senator talk about some of those. You all have a lot of those in your toolbox when you think about land use and zoning and what you might be able to do. Concepts such as density bonuses and accessory dwelling units. I know Arlington's doing a lot in that space, but what can you do to help? Where do you have land that might be city, county owned that you might be able to see if there are any developers that are able to come and put housing on that? We had a situation in Fairfax, any Fairfax people here, Government Center. They put housing on their government owned land. So we are also seeing new partners when it comes to affordable housing. Universities, hospitals, churches that have land and know the importance either because of their mission or business reasons. Universities, they need housing for their students, but also for their professors and the people that work at the universities. We also, most of you have old structures that you want to repurpose, adaptive reuse. We are just did, if you're familiar with anybody from Henrico, we're doing a lot in Henrico County, right west of the city of Richmond, and that's an old mall, Regency Mall, that is being now readapted to provide different uses, one of which is housing. We also have old schools that are being repurposed. Some of them have a historical nature that we're able to preserve through the housing that goes in there. With remote work, we'll probably have some office buildings in your areas that we need to think about how we can use those instead for housing. So it's a lot of different ways that we need to rethink where we can provide housing. We certainly know that there is a need, there's not enough inventory. I love conferences like this where you all come together and hear new ideas, because that's how you can go back to your jurisdictions and look at what your needs might be. I know we are happy to always work with you. As I mentioned, Chris Thompson's here. Also, we have Davis Boudreau, who's our legislative liaison here, but we have a whole team that is willing to come out and sit down with you and talk to you about what other areas of the Commonwealth are doing and how it might be appropriate in your area. So I think I'm going to just stop there and one other thing I did want to mention is another concept when we're talking about land use. City of Danville. I don't know if there are any Danville folks here, but we worked with Danville, the city, and the Virginia Manufactured Modular Housing Association, a nonprofit developer called Next Step, and we wanted to work with them on the ability to put some new manufactured housing into a landfill infilled area. And they thought out of the box and created a special district on city-owned land for these homes. So it was a way to make sure local land use policies weren't a barrier to getting some new homes in there. So lots of ideas, and you're in a situation, I know, to understand best the unique needs in your jurisdictions, but we do want to be partners and we want to help you in those efforts. So with that, I think I'll stop and turn this back over to you.
All right. Think of some questions? Huge issue, right? And I really appreciate all of the different ideas and thoughts. One of the key words to me is flexibility, and the sense that one size does not fit all. We all are facing this issue in various ways, and there are many different ways to deal with it. And I appreciate the thought that you want to listen to us and what we need. So, any questions out there? I mean, I can start off with a question, but I bet. All right, Julie, I thought you might be first out of the box. If you'd stand up to ask your question so everybody can hear, I may repeat it.
Okay.
So, because we are recording the session, and then say where you're from, if you will.
Hi, Julie Briskman, Loudoun County. We just are launched or endorsed our Urban Housing Institute plan. We're standing up our housing department. One thing that we keep hearing, especially from the Virginia majority and those constituents, is that a lot of the programs are not available to them. We started hearing during CARES Act funding coming through the they're either undocumented or they have an undocumented person in their family. And so they can't access the funds or the rent relief or all those programs. So two questions. Do you need state authority to be able to fix that, and or do you know of any jurisdictions that have been able to kind of work around the system so that people who are, in the construction industry paying their taxes, or in the service industry working and paying their taxes, but are either trying to get anything out of their homes? Anyone solve that problem?
Thank you. So I will hand that over to our panelists to see if there's anything they'd like to suggest. I've got some, but we'll see what you guys come up with. The question is about a lot of the immigrants in this state who are important members of our community. There's one member of a family who does not have proper documentation, and then they're finding that blocks access to ways to provide housing that they need.
So I'm just looking at Chris, but I don't believe the rent relief program required any type of residency documentation. I think the problem, though, is often those communities think it's a barrier. It's because I know there were a lot of landlords that, there of course has to be some documentation, submitted applications, I would say, not documentation, applications that have to be submitted either to us or to DHCD. But many times I think those undocumented families are fearful. They don't respond. They won't submit the applications. So that's why they don't get relief. So I think it's really more of a perception than a reality. So as much as we've tried to educate the public at large, but certainly the landlords, and I know they've gone out of their ways because it helps them too if they have tenants that are paying, and they've gone out of their way to to try to reach out to tenants, but sometimes they just don't get any answers.
And another approach that we used, understanding that the problem you just articulated is a real problem, we have worked through our rent assistance programs with the landlords directly. So in some cases, the landlords got the reimbursement, but there was a memorandum of understanding. There could be an eviction, and there had to be maybe some other conditions. The units had to be in good working order, et cetera, et cetera. But the dollars were going to the landlord, so that took the renters out of that conversation directly. They were part of it, but not as directly as they would be if they were applying to get the money themselves.
Next question. I will say, well, thank you. One real quick addition. We find sometimes using nonprofits where you've got people who are along with various communities that people they can trust and are comfortable talking to, having them help us spread the word.
Yes. Thank you very much. Angela Kelly, we second chair of the Hanover County Board of Supervisors. We're about 80% rural, 20% suburban. Not so much that I have a question so much as some feedback, I think, for everyone here. What we experience is that we're supposed to be, and we maintain that we should maintain control of our zoning decisions. But what we hear time and again from our residents is housing is a problem because the roads are underfunded. We've got schools that are aging. We've got, and when you go out to tell residents, hey, we're gonna put another neighborhood up, they're like, wait a minute, you haven't been able to, update our school. Our roads are crumbling. VDOT says, oh no, the roads are fine yet. I can't even get pavement for my people in my district. So now we're hearing that, well, gee, y'all aren't improving enough housing. We're gonna start taking control of this from the state level and putting in programs that might disrupt local zoning authority. That makes a lot of us very, uncomfortable. So there's a number of us who have heard this, that this issue of housing affordability is coming, and we are very concerned that some of the listening sessions that happen involve mostly the development community and nobody from local government who can speak to other accessory issues like water and sewer, again, infrastructure. So I offer that to you. We want to be here to help. Nobody wants to see our residents not be able to afford a home. But if you're going to tell me that, hey, instead of being able to do one $460,000 house, I'm going to give you, $350,000 townhomes, and that's going to solve an affordable housing crisis, that's just not where we are. So I offer that to you as feedback. I don't know if anybody else feels the same.
Thank you for the feedback, and I think I've heard it. There is some constitutional protection in our state constitution, so land use authority is squarely with local governments. And as far as I know, there isn't an appetite on the Senate Local Government Committee to reverse that. Maybe that will give you some peace of mind. I think we're much better off if we can work on this problem together and try to help you address the issues that may be causing some reprioritization by some of your constituents who are already housed, and they're probably concerned about their current services. We did put a lot of money in. Now we've got a state school modernization fund, which has been pretty well funded, and dollars have already flowed to our school systems to upgrade HVACs, including new roofs if they needed. Those dollars went out to every school system, and they were allocated per school. So, we're trying to address many of those problems. I think the road issue is a little different issue where, VDOT does prioritize the maintenance dollars. So, yeah.
Got one back here. Got one right here. Okay.
And just to describe that this was a mobile home park with 400 families. Fallen apart, decrepit private sewer, 70 years old. And so we've had access to various funding streams. It's incredibly complicated, but I am so appreciative of the nonprofits, Habitat of Greater Charlottesville, who has put in tens of thousands of hours, as has our local county staff, and with extra staff support provided by the county to carry this through. We just passed the second phase of this, so we now have access to get roads fixed. And it is incredibly tiring, but incredibly worthwhile. Because these families live in our communities. And I thought from the very beginning in 2007 was the failure is not an option on this. We just have to find a way, but it is all brand new. And so for the nonprofit who's never done rezoning before, they needed help knowing what to do to get through the site plan process. Anytime we can find templates to get really good direction for others to be able to do the same.
So we have been pleased to work closely with Southwood. In fact, ironically, I was talking with some of my staff about Southwood this morning and communicating with the Habitat Executive Director this weekend about some other grants that they're applying for. But as you said, this housing was in deplorable condition, and I think most of us do work with Habitat in some way or another and know that they are a very good nonprofit housing partner. So kudos for all that is going on with Southwood. And the real thing I want to emphasize is what you said. We've all got to share more where those success models are working. And I think then ultimately it will mean that we'll be able to, because it's taken a while for Habitat to get where they are. And they're really using a lot of their residents to give them feedback on what's good. So it really relies on that resident engagement. But we really need to share so that we can get better at doing this kind of thing. And it does take a lot of resources. So we've been very pleased to be able to partner with them on that. So kudos for all of you.
Somebody way in the back, I think. Yes.
Sorry. My name's Jesse Rutherford, through and through back row Baptist, I guess. That's why I'm back here. But from Nelson County, and the conversation of housing, you know, I know everyone often talks about it in the urban context, and it's such a rural issue. We often say in our region, with our planning district, that the housing issues of Charlottesville are also Nelson County's issues because, of course, whenever a house comes for rent that was rented for $800 a month in 2017, well, the guy from Louisa, he's going to rent it for $1,400, no questions asked. I think one of the things that we, as localities, are going to be leaning on, and it's probably a little bit more targeted with the senator, we're going to need specific guidance from the state. I think one thing that we often struggle with in our localities is interest groups and being very much influenced by these interest groups against anything new happening in terms of housing inventory. I know this is unpopular, but the reality of life is we're sitting here in my hometown. I watched rents go from $700 a month in 2017 for a one-bedroom, and now one bedroom is renting for close to $1,500 a month. Now, that is a story that is accurate across this Commonwealth. And kind of furthermore than that, if it's not a rent issue, well, you might find yourself in South Side or Southwest Virginia where 3 farmhouses that were taking care of families 20 years ago are now dilapidated. Now you're watching school populations dwindle, and we're not seeing that reflection and change of housing inventory and loss of families when it comes to our school budgets. So as we kind of look at that, we're going to be leaning on, obviously, the state, the Commonwealth, and trying to, in some ways, say yes, you need to say yes to housing in these areas. I don't know what that looks like, and I certainly know that a lot of us won't like necessarily the immediate answers, but at the same time, if we're going to take the housing conversation seriously, we got to get some of those requirements, and us trying to find out how it is that we can create more inventory in our areas. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck in regions like ours watching a constant change and loss of housing inventory and ever-increasing rents.
So thank you for that, and really good comments. But I can assure you, Virginia housing is not just an urban issue.
Yeah.
Chris will tell you that he knows the rural back roads of this Commonwealth probably better than anybody in this room because he's traveling on them a lot. So that's one of the reasons why we did this Planning District Commission grant program, because we know there are unique differences across the Commonwealth and our various regions. and we wanted to start that regional conversation about housing. We have 6 advisory committees that give us a lot of feedback on programs, and we have a rural advisory committee. So we're very in tune to the unique nature of rural issues. And I think you raised some good points. A lot of people living in communities don't want to see any growth. And it's very difficult because as community leaders, you know the importance of growth and you want economic opportunity and development. And to do that, we're seeing more and more businesses that are asking, well, if I come to this part of the state, where are my workers going to live? And we've got to be able to answer those questions if we want to keep making this a place where businesses want to grow and locate. So you raised some good issues. It is very difficult. A lot of those not my backyard attitudes still persist everywhere across the Commonwealth. That's in the suburbs, the cities, as well as the rural area. And we need to keep working together to talk about how important housing is in the conversations.
I would also encourage your economic development team to work with the state because there are grants going out under the economic development rubric, particularly to our rural areas where we're hearing that there's a strategy for making a large plot of land ready for development. In other words, it's ready to attract a manufacturing company or a large employer. But as part of that development plan that some rural communities are doing, you need to include housing. So workers can be there, close to where that manufacturing plant might be that you're trying to attract, or a data center, or whatever you've put your target on in terms of a potentially good employer for your area, and you're trying to get the land ready for this development. Please include housing. So there are some things that are going on now that are actually being funded that maybe you can access and hopefully use to the fullest extent. But thank you for the question. I think that really needed to be, the rural perspective really needed to come out. So thank you for that.
I'm not really on the panel, but I'll add, because we're dealing with this in Arlington. I mean, they pay us the big bucks, right? Because we have to work with people who don't want any change, but we have to change with really working people. That's why we all get paid so much. And it's hard. Yeah, managing change. I mean, one of the things that we're in the middle of a major, we're trying to change our single-family housing zoning to allow for more units, and it's really hard. 70% of our geography is single-family. It's exclusionary zoning. It was done years ago to keep people out. And it's tricky. But one of the things we do say is, well, what if we do nothing? And get people to visualize what happens if you do nothing, which is, for you, I think, a lot of decaying farmhouses and not getting anywhere. So anyway, a little sidebar conversation. I do want us to add a little bit of something there. We're all in this together. It's tough wherever you are. Rural, urban, suburban. Another question?
Well,
okay, go there and then there. That's April. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi, April Knox, Montgomery County. I'm looking at Chris. I also, just full disclosure, work for a affordable housing developer, Taylor Construction in Montgomery County. And I just wanted to comment that some of the programs that have come through various means, the Housing Innovations Energy Efficiency Grant Program, Vibrant Community Initiatives Program, some of those programs that have come through that have enabled innovations in housing and a lot of flexibility in development then disappear. And what happens is, so the HIEE funding is no longer available. It was available for one grant cycle. What happens is your developers get really familiar with those programs, and then when they disappear, new programs replace them. You have to learn a whole new set of things, and it's hard for developers, especially in affordable housing, to cobble together the various funding streams to make those programs or make those projects a reality. It kind of perpetuates the cycle of making it hard to develop affordable housing, and then just in a similar vein, working with local governments and private developers is something that my company and professional board of supervisors has been a really nice ability in our community, which is somewhat rural, to get some of those affordable housing programs off the ground. So anything that can be done on a state level to enable those relationships and provide resources to make those relationships happen and possible would be super helpful for more affordable housing development.
Yes, thank you for the question. First of all, affordable housing is not easy, and you know that, and that's what you said, and it usually takes a lot of different resources coming to the table to get it together. Though I think an advantage for Virginia housing is the way we're structured, and because we are independent, our programs are able to continue, and they don't start and stop. They continue without, having, sorry, but the
Interference with the
appropriation from the General Assembly. It is different because the Department of Housing and Community Development, they do run the programs that are funded by the state. For example, the Housing Trust Fund. Now the good news is there is, I think, the most money in the Housing Trust Fund that there has been for decades, and it's about $75 million a year for each of the 2 years, and it was down. Well, early 2000, yeah, it was down to nothing in there the first part of the 2000s, but then it was like 7 million, 10 million, and so now it's significantly more. And again, that's administered by DHCD, but they are kind of an arm of the state government, so whatever is allocated from the General Assembly, that's the programs they run into. Frequently, that is some start and stop. Federal programs the same way. Rent relief was a great program, but it has stopped. But what we hope to bring to the table, as you mentioned, with some of the funds that you talked, like innovative funds and grants and all that, is we like to try to make those ongoing without that risk involved. But it is very difficult because you have to bring so many different funding sources to the table to put those deals together. So I understand that.
I don't think I have much to add to that, other than the General Assembly would like to hear about the programs that you think are working on the ground. So it's helpful to us if you can let us know, talk to your local delegates and senators, so we can ensure that funding continues, because otherwise we really don't know. So thank you for raising that.
Is there limited funds in this affordable home budget in terms of how much money you actually have to use when you have to build these homes? Because sometimes I think one of the things that communities are concerned about is the look, the aesthetics, right? So when you build, it looks cheaper than the next door. So do you have any, do you want to,
Do you repeat the question?
Okay, I'm gonna repeat the question. I think the question was, do we have any requirements on what an affordable unit should look like? And we do, the answer is, it's complex again, the local government actually does the approval for that project. So it's the local government that will determine what criteria that housing project should meet to fit into their neighborhood. I mean, I've visited many jurisdictions, and in the northern part of the region, and my son lives in the northern neck, you can't identify which projects are affordable and which ones are not. And that is very important. Because everybody's part of one big community. We want our units to fit in. We want affordable units to fit in. We want everybody to feel welcome and well cared for. And I know that there are criteria when we allocate money from the Housing Trust Fund. Our friends are here from the Department of Community and Housing Development. You know, they want to make sure that we have energy efficient appliances, that building is somewhat environmentally friendly, that we, have playground, if it's going to be housing families. So there are certain, I wouldn't call them hard and fast criteria, but there's certain elements that help us prioritize where the money should go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Sort of. Well, maybe Susan will hit the nail.
I did want to mention that if Virginia Housing either finances it or awards it federal tax credits, I can assure you that there are construction guidelines. We have a whole crew that's looking at the plans. We have criteria in the tax credit program that gives points for things like recreation centers, quality products like brick, on how it's built, how it does fit into the community. So as Senator said, usually on those developments, people are always surprised to find out that they're part of the tax credit program or our financing because they look so nice. And our goal is to make sure that they're not only nice for the communities today, but nice for the communities for years to come. But now, when it gets to homeownership, it's a little bit different, I think, and that gets back into, and as the senator said, the Department of Housing and Community Development, they do have, they're the ones that put together the building code to try to, set some of those criteria, but ultimately a lot of it gets back to what's approved in your jurisdictions.
And I was just going to say, and we want our units that are funded with low-income tax credits or the Housing Trust Fund or any other public source of revenue to look good, to be sustainable, and to be high quality. That's important. Otherwise, our communities will push back on affordable housing, and we don't want that.
I'm going to go back there and come forward. Well, okay, in the far back, and then in the middle, and then into the front. Gentlemen in the back, yes.
I'm Reginald Williams, supervisor from Milford County, Virginia. And when we talk about affordable housing, I think about, your cul-de-sacs and how you build different developments in, because a lot of places in rural areas, they're putting development in. In that development, you got certain things you got to meet. You got to have a certain color code. You got a certain size house and all of this. In low income, I'm wondering how come we can't do the same thing. I noticed y'all use the word to fit in. If you sitting in a house in a certain way, you say 2,500 square feet, and I'm building one 700 square feet. If we be honest with ourselves, we would not put it in that area. And my question is, why not we building communities instead of, I'm saying low income houses, they've been out for a long time. We have been putting developments in for a long time in different areas. We put them there because we can do it, but how can we make them last a long time? Like in the area I'm staying in, and I asked the question, put low income housing, and I said, well, why don't we have some kind of guidelines on the individuals that are there? In other words, we're not only changing houses, we are changing our culture because they don't take care of, they don't, sometimes low income houses, they don't take care of, they don't have no guidelines like we have in cul-de-sacs or different places that we're building. And localities like what y'all talking about now, if you ride through them, you will notice. You see, you got big open columns on the end, you ride down, you got nice homes. I'll say average homes are a little bit better, but they're all together. So if we do a cul-de-sac set in low-income housing, then everybody in the low-income housing would be equal to a way that they'll change their culture or the way they're thinking. If we don't change, we're talking about taking care of not only putting them in a house, it's showing that they have some value. And value, every individual is not going to take care of what they have. On the road, they have a speed limit, say 55. And a lot of developments, once again, you got guidelines on what color doors you put on, the shutters, what color the house. So if we do low-income housing, if we think about changing the community, we can't get it to fit in, but we can grow one so to fit in, and they would have somewhere to stay if it's funded properly. And I see it happening. I noticed it my first time when I was in Harrisonburg, up by James Harris. And we was on a track meet, and I saw a trailer park. In this particular trailer park, If you've been to Florida, how they set up homes when people go down on visitation, all of them look alike. They got recreation and all of these kind of things because they got a good income. Now, if we think of helping people that are less fortunate, we got to make it look like what they can afford, we can afford, and they will appreciate what they got. Because now with crime and everything high, we'll put them in housing, we'll put them in projects, and we'll leave them alone and all these kind of things. So my perspective and my challenge is to make them look at they're something, or they're somebody. It's their development. If they got columns at the front of the road that they go in, they can see, they will gain respect. But we're changing the culture along with changing our low-income housing. That's the way I look at it, that's what I see. You know, and I appreciate y'all listening.
Yeah, next question. Thank you for the comments. Appreciate it. There's a gentleman back here in the middle. Yes.
Bill Lee, Maxwell County, Lowell, Northern, and I think you said your son living in Northern. I tell you this, when you mention the word affordable housing or lower income, people lose their mind. The doctor's going to let you know that. Now, what I'm wondering, this is what we have a problem with. Finding a developer who will partner with you to build affordable housing. They have a certain profit margin they want to make. So is there some listing or something that you all have can point us to that might have a developer or other developers that will partner with a county?
Well, I think this is where the local government can use some of its tools and the state can use some of its tools. There's some advantage to having mixed income. So a developer can still, make a reasonable profit on a project that has market rate units, as well has some units that might be affordable to those individuals at 60% of the median income or less. But they're all mixed together in one unit. And, a local government can provide an incentive for that. Whether it's, an additional density or another incentive that you think might be helpful in the approval process, then that sends a message. That's the kind of community you want to build. You want places where everybody, regardless of their income, can live in quality buildings, and you value that mixed income approach. And I think the state can provide some incentives in that area as well. I'll ask Susan to do it.
Well, and I think to your point is I wish we didn't have to put labels on everything. The tax credit program is a federal program that is, the title is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, and unfortunately, when you use that term, that immediately generates concerns. Even the concept of affordable housing. Really, what does that mean? And there are different affordability restrictions on various programs, state and federal, and maybe local. But really, affordability is all about what the family can afford to pay for housing, realizing that they still have other needs, food, transportation, health, that they have to be responsible for. So, your point's a good one, but I think it really does take a lot of resources to come together, and I know developers are really struggling to get enough. Even a lot of our best developers, they can't get enough of the subcontractors. They're having supply chain issues right now. So they're struggling also. I don't know that there's any particular list, as you mentioned, but sometimes it helps. I know there's one jurisdiction now that's putting out requests for proposals to try to bring some developers to the table and help them. And I know particularly as you get into the more rural areas of the Commonwealth, it's even harder to find developers and builders and subcontractors. So one of the things that we probably need to work on is getting more tradesmen back into the business so that you can have some more partners at the table. It is a challenge.
Yeah, we have time for one more. I will say there are developers that specialize in doing either the low income or the mixed, and we put out requests for proposals. You might want to consider doing that. They're national firms, and more there's more interest in doing that kind of work, and they do want to do this quality work. So there are this, I mean, I think it's in the search or reach out to any one of us, and I'm sure we have this helps to our direction. All right, Takas, you've been, yes, waiting very patiently, Takas, go ahead.
Oh, no. It's impossible to fit housing in 1 hour discussion, especially in Virginia, right now, after the pandemic and everything. So tax concerns in Marietta County, Marietta County, period, and we have urban problems. One of these is that we have been trying to fit all our incentives, all our opportunities, in order to accommodate mostly the 60% AMI constituents. We somehow, the economics of financing and the demands meet somewhere at this. However, we found out that AMI has skyrocketed since last year, more than 10% over a summer. And secondly, that the lower percentiles of income, like lower than 50%, lower than 40 and 30% AMI, aren't really better off economics than the actual economy. We avoided a big displacement and, having them to leave their homes, thanks to massive government intervention, and legislative intervention. But right now, the problem, all this is going away. We are with 30%, 40% issue of deep affordability. The entire market has moved on. But this is a significant part of something that are left behind now. There are severe and red. So it is extremely difficult ways to subsidize. The question is how is Virginia housing
I think your point's a good one, and generally.
What's the question?
Okay, so his question, if I can paraphrase it, was basically about how it's getting harder and harder to serve the lower income levels, not 60% of area median income, but 50, 40, and 30%. And there really aren't good tools available for that. And it is, I mean, you're exactly right. I know there are some of the programs that we run, like the tax credit program, generally serves 60% and below. And sometimes you'll find localities like Arlington that will put some of their money in to help subsidize and get the rates lower, serve a lower income level. And I would say generally, though, to serve that 30% population, you have to have some kind of a rent subsidy, like a housing choice voucher, which comes through the federal. There are some that are available through the state, mostly in the disability space. And veterans, there's some they're called VASH vouchers. And so those are available, but you know, guess what? Now we're finding a lot of people that finally get a voucher can't find the inventory of the apartment. So it's, you know, you can imagine if you've been on a waiting list and you finally get a voucher and then you can't find your apartment to use that voucher. So it's incredibly difficult to serve that population without some type of rent subsidy program. And unfortunately, most of those have come from the federal government through HUD, and they are not increasing the way the need is increasing.
I would just say the model I spoke of earlier, the single room occupancy, that model has, around the country, they've had experiences serving folks at 30 and 40% of the median income, because again, it's costing less per unit. So you're bringing down the cost considerably, and then if they need a subsidy either from the state or local government or the federal HUD project-based housing, then they don't have as big a difference to make up. You really have to look at more creative ways of housing folks that are at 30 and 40%, 50% of the area median income. I mean, that's why we're doing accessory dwelling units in Arlington. You just have to find different ways because it's very much a challenge. There is a project in Arlington, it's right on Cherrydale, where the entire building was built with HUD money for seniors. And they're at 50% of the median income below, but it was all HUD finance, and it was targeted to just seniors.
All right, I think we're out of time. Small apologies for the Arlington centricity of this, a little bit, that's just the way it is. But clearly, it's an issue that we're all faced with.